This is Algebra 1, Lesson 10-6, Solving Quadratics by Taking Square Roots. This is the introduction lesson. Today's date is Tuesday, April 14th, 4/18/2020. So our objective today is just to solve basic quadratics, and you're going to be taking the square root. That's it. So essentially it's another step in Pemdas, but before we do that, let's talk about our vocab. We've been seeing this over and over again because it's useful for this entire unit. Functions. Functions have zeros, and I can't spell, so let me redo that. Functions have zeros. Graphs have x-intercepts. Equations have solutions, and expressions have roots. All of those are synonymous in different contexts, you know that, and then we have their picture down here and what you're looking for. Equations have an equal sign, functions have an f of x. Today we are dealing with equations, and we're dealing with functions. So before I go too far, let's talk about Pemdas. So let's fill it in. Pemdas is P, E, M and D are on the same level, A and S are on the same level. This is all the way back from like Unit 2, right? We're really good at doing this. So let's go ahead and say P, you have parentheses, so something that looks like that, an exponent. And all this stuff on the left hand side I'm going to try to undo. So if I have an exponent, let's say in this case x squared, since I'm dealing with quadratics, let's just randomly say if I had something times 7 and let's say something minus 6. How do I do the inverse of that? By the way, if you're simplifying, you're going down in this direction, so you should do an arrow down this direction. And when you're solving for a variable, you're going the opposite direction. You're undoing Pemdas. So if you're undoing this minus 6, you're going to be, change to a different color here. I should have done that for this arrow as well. So if you're undoing it, I'm going to be adding 6. If I'm undoing multiply by 7, I'm going to divide by 7. If I'm undoing x squared, and this is the key point today, I'm going to take the square root of whatever that is. So I'll just leave that as square root. And there's not really an inverse for parentheses. There is an inverse for absolute value, though. We'll talk about that another day. Let's move on to example 1. Just know that in order to undo a square, you're going to square root. So solve for x. The first thing that I see I can do is I can get rid of this addition and subtraction. That's the lowest rung here to undo. So I'm going to add a 22 to both sides. So plus 22 plus 22. And that 22 cancels out. I'm left with this 2x squared is equal to 32. Next step. I'm on this. Do I see any multiplication or division? Oh yeah, this multiplication, 2 times x squared. So let's undo that multiplication by dividing both sides by 2, dividing both sides by 2, and that 2 will cancel out, and I'm left with just x squared is equal to, and I should move this equal to make sure it's always underneath. It should kind of be a straight line of equal to signs. 32 divided by 2 is 16. Cool, I'm on to my final and last step, which is how do I undo a something squared? And the answer, I just went over it right up here, is you take the square root. So I'm now going to take the square root of the left and the square root of the right. When you do that, though, you get 2 answers. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 16, which is 4. Why? Why did I do plus or minus there? And I haven't talked about it, but let's think about this. If I have negative 4 times negative 4, that's equal to 16. And if I have 4 times 4, that's also equal to 16. 16. So I don't know if it was a positive or a negative 4 for my answer. So just 100% of the time, and I'll maybe make this all in red, maybe a giant star next to it. Every time you do a square root to undo a square, so every time, I guess you should be saying undoing something like x squared by taking the square root, that means you'll have to always do the plus or the minus with the square root. And that's kind of maybe circle the plus or minus. That's the important part. Most people forget that. Like it's weird to think about that in terms of geometry. Like if I have a square that has a side length of I don't know, 5, therefore that side length is 5. Or maybe I told you that the area of that square was 25. What would the side length be? Well, you'd be like, oh, you take the square root of 25 and it's 5. You don't think about the negative 5 because in this context, negative 5 is not in the domain. We're in the real world. I can't have a negative length. So it is there, and then you get rid of it because it's not in the domain. So you're always actually doing that. So in geometry, I'll be doing that as well, where I say it's plus or minus, but you can't do minus because that doesn't make sense. It's a long-winded way of doing that. But there we go. Let's go on to example 2. I know I'm trying to make these videos as short as possible because I want to do a lesson and homework. Find the zeros of the function. So there's the other keyword. 0 means I'm plugging 0 into this f of x. So my new equation is 0 is equal to this negative 6x squared plus 150. From there, I'm going to I'm trying to isolate that x squared, so I'm going to subtract 150 from both sides, minus 150, minus 150. When I do that to both sides of the equal sign, I have negative 150 on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, those cancel out, so I'm left with negative 6x squared. All right, multiplication by negative 6x. Let's undo that multiplication by dividing both sides by negative 6. Divide the left-hand side by negative 6, and that's going to be... well, if I did divided by 2 is 75 and divided by 3, 25. Okay, so this is 25. How do I know that? Well, negative divided by negative is a positive. And again, you can just check this on your calculator if you don't trust me. From here, the negative 6 cancels out and I'm left with x squared. And my final step is to undo the square by taking the square root of both sides. And my answer is x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 25, and I guess I can just write that's 5. And that's my final answer. So you can write it more condensedly like this. I really like it because it's less writing, and I'm kind of a lazy mathematician. But in Khan Academy, you're going to be writing it like this. You'll say, one of the answers is negative 4, one of the answers is 4, one of the answers is negative 5, one of the answers is 5. In Khan Academy, it asks for the smallest solution. What they really mean is, what is the more negative solution? So you enter negative 5 first, or you'll enter negative 4 first, and then you'll enter the bigger number. Cool, that's all I have for the notes today. Hopefully that covers everything that will be in tonight's homework. We'll have another lesson and another quick homework tomorrow.